Unfortunately, sensationalism is what sells. And I think with the way the press was to Trump, and you can act basically like this Jim Acosta, ask him anything under the planet and insult the guy while he's up there. And I think that started being part of the MO of the guys asking questions in the press room. They go above and beyond what is customary. They're looking for their moment in the sun. Oh, they can get a player on this or they can get a player on that. When Fuzzy Zeller was basically lambasted for saying, what he said about, the menu the next year at the Masters after Tiger won. I mean, that killed Fuzzy. It wasn't him.
Folks, the shock is settling in. Yes, 29-year-old Lexi Thompson is retiring after this year. I brought on a person who's played the PGA Tour, worked on the Golf Channel, and knows the media inside and out. Mark, no lie, what do you think is going on right now with Lexi Thompson? She's retiring immediately after, within a few days actually, of Grayson Murray committing suicide.
Oh boy. Well, first of all, the Grayson Murray thing was a real downer for the whole golf world. There's a lot of stress in this game, and there's a lot of stress in life. Golf and pro sports in general will expose a lot of these weaknesses, both mentally and otherwise. They accentuate everything.
I just think, especially with what's happened in golf as of recent too, a lot of people don't realize a lot of what we go through as a professional athlete. I mean, and I'll be the last one to say, like, throw me a pity party. That's the last thing I want. But, we're doing what we love. We're trying the best every single day. And, we're not perfect. We're humans. Words hurt.
I mean, I had a pretty good temper, and I had some issues mentally, and they fully blossomed when I became a player full time on the PGA Tour. It is not easy. In fact, my daughter tells me all the time, she goes, "Dad, why did you ever introduce me to this game?" She's actually pretty good. But she goes, "Why, Dad? This is painful." And so we all think, Grayson Murray just won in Hawaii. He's got a 3-year exemption. Why would anybody want to do this to himself or whatever? But it's not a perfect world. There are struggles every day. There's struggles weekly, monthly, yearly, financially. There are personal problems. We aren't robots. And as much as people expect us to be, I mean, look at what Tiger's done. Look at what Phil has done. I mean, these guys are no saints. Arnold Palmer, he's not a saint. I think the only saint that I know of that's associated with the PGA Tour is Barbara Nicholas. Now, she's a saint. But no, it's a tough life, even though what you guys see, what everyone sees, is not really representative of what people go through every day. Now, in reference to Lexi Thompson, look, she's been at this since she was 14 or 15 years old. She's pushing 30 right now. I've had a chance to be around her and actually interviewed her one time. She is a stunning individual. She is bright. She is attractive. She is talented. She is a lot of things. And one thing that I think really hurt her was when they called like a 4-shot penalty on her the day after, and she was contending, I guess it was a major championship. And I had been a little bit closer involved with her because I knew her caddy. His name is Benji Thompson, really good kid from Augusta. And he was the guy that did the cannonball or the backflip into the water at Mission Hills in Palm Springs, right behind Lexi. So he won that major championship with her. But obviously, she's had her share of disappointment. And I know from following women's golf and girls' golf of how catty people can be. It doesn't happen so much on the men's tour. You hear stuff and you get pissed off and it kind of goes away. But I think women in general, and I can just tell this from personal experience with my wife, her and I are totally different. A dart hits her and stays in there. A dart hits me and I just blow it off. Some people let the dart stay in there. And I think what happened with Lexi, obviously she could have won the U.S. Women's Open at Lakeside there at Olympic Club. Man, I felt really bad for her losing that one. I felt bad for her when that penalty got called on her on a phone call or something like that. These things add up. And sometimes you say, why do I want to continue doing this? When I was in my final years on the PGA Tour, and I hate to keep bringing myself into this, but I understand. Look, I went through 10 years on the PGA Tour, 7 years of those were married. When I got divorced, when I got out there again, I said, is that all there is? How many times can I keep coming to Quad Cities Open? How many times can I keep going to Endicott, New York? How many times can I just keep coming to San Diego or coming to LA and put up with the traffic? After a while, you're saying, man, do I not have anything else to do? Well, I think you realize that. And I think Greg Norman even realized it. Remember when he was had a hand injury? I want to say it was in his middle 40s. And I was on the set one time and they said, what do you think that this will do for Greg Norman? And I said, you know something? He's going to be forced to smell the roses. I think he'll probably like being semi-retired. Damn it, that isn't exactly what he did. Okay? And they beat me up with, oh man, no, he's going to be back. He'll be back. And I said, yeah, he may be back, but I mean, look, he may like it on the other side. Look at David Duval. When he's semi-retired, he said, man, this is great. And he got out of it too young. It happens on the LPGA. Lorena Ochoa, I think she retired when she was 28 years old.
Lorena Ochoa ended up marrying I don't know if he was a billionaire, but he owned like airlines. So I think it's easier to go grass is greener when there's a sweet pot of gold, I think, over there.
Well, I don't think Lorena Ochoa would have ever had to work another day in her life anyway, but now she's probably royalty, being in that kind of company. But she was pretty comfortable on her own. What a graceful champion she was. I love watching her play. Had a little head movement in there. It was kind of funky. With Lexi Thompson, it's people are critical. Maybe she didn't play well in Solheim and they beat you up on that. And then she didn't win the ladies US Open. She got beat up on that. She got beat up on the ball marking thing. And I look at her, and when I was introducing her to the crowd, I mean, I had to stand up on my toes. I mean, I'm 6'1", 6'2". I was looking eye to eye at that girl, man. I said, let's sit down. I'm uncomfortable. And when I interviewed her, it was the best. I mean, she was insightful. She knew exactly who she was talking to. And maybe she said at this time, I've been there and I've done that. And I don't need people taking shots at me. And, words hurt. And yeah, they do hurt. And, sometimes they stick around a while.
Well, Mark, Matt, you discussed the pressures you felt on the PGA Tour. How much more would they have been amplified in today's society with social media? And It seems like the press nowadays, I don't know how it was back in, the 70s and 80s and 90s, but they're particularly, to me, vicious nowadays.
Half the things that I did in the 80s and 90s would have never been exposed like they are now. I mean, man, back in the day, you could whap a pineapple tee marker at Hawaii, right? I mean, I remember unloading on one of them suckers. They would get these pineapples, okay? And they would paint them gold and they would be using them as tee markers. Man, I whapped that thing so hard, I got pineapple juice all over myself. And nobody ever really found out. I don't know why the marshal didn't squeal on me. But anyway, things like that now just get exposed to the nines. I mean, and then if nobody saw it, somebody heard about it and somebody posted it, you can't get away with anything. Look at the thing that Justin Thomas did at Hawaii. The FAGGOT. He's on the green muttering to himself and the sound picks it up. I'm not saying that it didn't happen in the 80s and 90s, but man, now it's definitely happening. And they've just got access to so many things. What they're doing now with remember in John Rahm's ball, the camera angles and everything right now, the tools that they have available, the sound listening devices, the camera work. When John Rahm jostled that ball in at Memorial on the 16th hole, he had like a 5-shot lead or something like that, or a 4-shot lead. And then the ball was resting and he was soling his club and the ball looked like went up and down, up and down, up and down. And he hit the shot and I think he holed it or almost hold it. And when they got in, they basically said, hey, guess what? You can add 2 on that thing because, we determined from the camera angle that ball moved. And he said, what? What are you talking about? Well, it won't matter for the championship because you're still going to win by a shot. But, I'm thinking, holy mackerel, if you have to go through that kind of tediousness to find out if it's a penalty or not, I mean, come on. And then, the media gets in there. If there's a Xander Schauffele thing, somebody was belly aching about him taking advantage of a rule or whatever. He had an official right there. And guys were texting me on X and they're saying, what do you think of this unplayable? What do you think about this at Let It Fly? And I said, look, no harm, no foul. If there's an official there watching and he's doing that thing, then you pretty much have to do what the official says, whether it's taking advantage of a rule or not. So I said, no harm, no foul. And they said, the answer was, well, obviously you didn't see it and I hope he never wins a major. Well, 2 weeks later, he wins a major. But yeah, it's crucial right now. Instagram, Facebook, all of that stuff, Twitter, X, Truth Social, man, you can't get away with anything. And there are some pretty harmful people out there that have nothing better to do than to chop you down off of whatever pedestal you think you're on. So I think people that get into that too much, they start, how many likes do I have? How many do I have? Don't let that bother you. But yeah, today is a totally different world than the 80s and 90s for sure.
Do you think that Lexi would still be playing if she was back in the 80s and 90s because potentially she'd have less mental stress from all the, as you pointed out, the ball moving situation and her losing a tournament and just that being always brought up over and over again?
Well, I'm sure there's been some mental scarring as there is with anybody, but I don't think she would probably be able to retire in the 80s and 90s. The LPGA, the purses were paltry back then. I think now money is so good outside of the golf for her because she is such an outstanding person that now she can parlay that into what Annika Sorenstam is doing. I mean, really, Annika Sorenstam has an empire out there. She's more usable today, I think, as a Hall of Famer than she probably was playing in her day. So I think with that, Lexi, she probably wants to have a family. She sees how happy Annika is, I'm sure. And Annika, she posts about her kids all the time. I mean, it's just great. And her and Mike McGee, what a great couple. And so Lexi, she's attractive. She's got brothers. They're both great kids, Curtis and Nick. I've watched both of them play. And so a golfing family, I'm sure she wants to have a family. And a family ain't the place to be on the LPGA Tour. I'm telling you, I used to kid my buddy Peter Jacobson, who would bring his kids out on the tour. And I said, how do you do that, man? It's really hard. But he did it, and just about everybody did. But I think it'd be really tough for Lexi to have a family while she was playing out there.
Tennis star Naomi Osaka has announced she's withdrawing from the French Open Roland Garros in Paris. It comes after she was fined $15,000 for skipping a news conference after a match. In a statement on Twitter, she says in part that the move is the best thing for the tournament, the other players, and her well-being. So, Christine, what do you make of this?
And the issue of mental health was lost in the fact that contractually she's obliged to do interviews, as are all tennis players and most athletes around the world, and that is because they want to promote their sport and women's tennis.
I don't know if you remember this, but there was the tennis French Open where Naomi Osaka claimed mental health issues and she didn't want to do the interviews. And then it became a whole thing is, should she be forced to do the interviews? And then you had the very vile Christine Brennan interviewed and saying that tough luck, this is what, this is part of the deal. You have to do the interviews. Do you think that players should be forced to do the interviews? And do you also think that the journalists can ask whatever questions they want, or should there be some kind of boundaries established?
Unfortunately, sensationalism is what sells. And I think with the way the press was to Trump, and you can act basically like this Jim Acosta, ask him anything under the planet and insult the guy while he's up there. And I think that started being part of the MO of the guys asking questions in the press room. They go above and beyond what is customary. They're looking for their moment in the sun. They can get a player on this, or they can get a player on that. When Fuzzy Zeller was basically lambasted for saying, what he said about, the menu the next year at the Masters after Tiger won. I mean, that killed Fuzzy. It wasn't him. I mean, he was a goofball, and still is. I love the guy. But I think there's some fear in there because you never know what's coming next from the press now. You just don't. And what's the agenda of this guy? Is this guy going to write a book? Is this guy trying to piss me off? Is he trying to make me look bad? And I love the guys like Bobby Knight, who would just undress these guys if they gave him a bad question. But, maybe there needs to be more of that. But it's not ladylike to do that, and it's not gentlemanly like to do that. But sometimes when you're up there, and I've been in those situations before, man, what an idiot, what a stupid ass question that is. But still, you do have to make yourself available, unless there's something, like Steve Carlton. Remember him? Pitched for the Philadelphia Phillies, lefty. A good buddy of mine played baseball on his team. His name was Warren Brewster. He was a reliever for them back when they won the series back in the 80s. And Steve Carlton came out to follow me play golf. And he had these big old ball bearings that he was putting in he's a left-hander. He had these things in his hands all day to strengthen his hand. And I said, Dan, why do you do that? He said, man, I got to be better. He says, and I said, oh, by the way, why don't you talk to the press? He never talked to the press. He'd get done with the game and he'd be off because they would bring up stuff that he didn't want to hear about. So somehow they gave him a pass. Tom Weiskopf, I love the guy. I mean, he was a painful interview too. Sometimes he wouldn't go in there. Guys would ask him questions because they know it would piss him off. They'd ask him the wrong type of question. They would just bait guys in there. So I think there's more baiting going on these days in the way that journalism is more sensationalized. People want to get clicks. They want to, be notorious for asking that question, like the Jim Gray and Pete Rose interview.
Pete, let me ask you now. It seems as though that there is an opening. The American public is very forgiving. Are you willing to show contrition, admit that you bet on baseball, and make some sort of an apology to that effect?
Not at all, Jim. Not at all.
I mean, man, that was pretty outstanding, wasn't it?
Right.
So, yeah, I think people just like Rick Riley. He wants his day in the sun, I guess, and that's why he writes stuff like he did about Donald Trump burning down his trophies and melting them down and making a toilet seat out of them. I mean, come on, man, that's ridiculous. So, unfortunately, there are some writers out there that are very similar to that.
Well, to me, they also can affect the actual outcome of the tournament, because I remember Greg Norman saying that he had spoken with a journalist, maybe just at a bar or something like that, before the final round of the 96 Masters. And the journalist had told him, not even you can blow this tournament. And then obviously we know Norman did not win. You also got, in terms of interfering with the tournament, Alan Shipnuck. He comes out with these things. He's saying that, and he's now known for being anonymous sources guy. He gets all the stuff out about Mickelson saying the Saudis are scary, etc. Now you have the reigning PGA champion not playing the Masters or defend his title in the next PGA championship. So these guys are having an effect on the game overall.
Yeah, I think you just have to draw the line. Yeah, you're getting a guy to come forward. Yeah, these are deep, dark motherfucker. Do you print that? No, you don't. You get the idea. You don't go verbatim with the guy. If he's trusting you in his circle, he's gonna use colorful language. Does that need to be exposed? No, it doesn't. And when it does, when people do expose that, there's something besides that article that this guy is looking for. I mean, I'm halfway on Shipnuck because he's written some good stuff. I think he's been fair, and he's been sensationalism at its worst sometimes as well. Rick Riley's a pretty good writer. Some of these guys, Tim Rosaforte, pretty good, but he would never violate a player's trust, or he would never go out and say something that was distasteful in describing a player, like Phil doing that. That's just Phil talking that way in a locker room setting. You don't expose that from a guy. So that's how the press, I think, has changed these days. They've gotten more brazen. They've got bolder. They want to ask the question to make the guy cry or make the guy blow up. And, if you're smart as a player or the person being interviewed, you see right through that and you just say, next question.
Well, do you remember with Alan Shipnuck? And I'm a big anti-Shipnuck guy, because remember when he was in London, he was saying that he wanted to follow Phil Mickelson around, and Phil Mickelson wasn't given the time of day, obviously, because you made him a pariah in the media. So of course he doesn't want you around. And then he's saying that, Greg Norman said he didn't run into Shipnuck, and he gets this one photo where Norman's in the background. So now you have Shipnuck in the foreground, Norman's looking over his shoulder. You could see him look toward the camera. They get the photo they want. And then within 24 hours, Shipnuck is on CNN. I made a video about it. This guy, it's all orchestrated with him.
Yeah, and he's trying to sell books. That's the deal. And you just have to know those guys and don't give them the time of day. I'm sure he gets along fine. We got along fine with Phil for a while, so much that Phil spilled his guts. But I guess you can't trust him.
Final question on this topic. We had, in terms of the LIV press conferences, I remember there was Lee Westwood and Ian Poulter getting asked about, is there any regime you wouldn't play for? Obviously, we're still with the whole Saudi blood money narrative. And at one point, Poulter says, I don't have to answer that question. Do you think there should be some kind of way, where, as I mentioned before, that the professionals can set a boundary with these guys? Because all they're going to try to do is increasingly have more gotcha questions.
Well, that was a gotcha for Ian, but he could have come back at them and saying, well, why was it okay to play for these people for 2 years in a row? Because we were part of the European tour. I mean, he should have undressed him, is what he should have done. But knowing Poltz, he probably says, I might get in trouble here. That's a question that I've heard before, and that's the narrative. So, but yeah, I don't blame him for not answering, but I would have undressed him. I would have said, oh, okay, well then why don't you just talk about the 28 tour sponsors now that do business in Saudi Arabia, including Federal Express, which has a major base in Riyadh. Do we not want to talk about that? Isn't Federal Express the blanket sponsor of the PGA Tour and the FedEx Cup and the FedEx Cup Championships and a tour event? Wow, that's really something, isn't it? That's what I would have done. So why don't you ask Federal Express if there's a regime they wouldn't do business with?
Another way to go with it would have been to say Pol Pot, because you draw the line at cannibalism. I'll leave that there.
What?
Yeah, I'll leave that there.
I think you've
And then
lost
finally, I've got one more actual final question. Why haven't the PGA Tour players now faced the same questions the LIV players were facing? Because now they're taking the same money.
Yeah, well, same thing with the LPGA. I mean, they play for Aramco, right? They've got the 4 tournament series. And guess what? That's the same money that PIF is. It's Saudi Arabian money Come on. So, no, they won't ask that because that would be way too embarrassing for the PGA Tour. And they might get their credentials slapped away from them if they, ask the wrong question. That's just the way it is. Until we expose all the bad stuff that's going on, these guys are going to follow like sheep. And I do mean the writers, and I do mean the broadcasters, and I do mean the guys that have no personal say. Uh, uh, they can't get personal like I'm getting personal. You know, the only reason I can really say this stuff is because I don't have a job. If I worked for Golf Channel, no way could I ever get on this. If I worked for SiriusXM, no way. If I still played on the tour, no way. I'm retired. I'm financially set. And the only thing I have is my knowledge of what I've been exposed to all of these years in golf. And I hate where things are right now. I hate that the game has become a non-gentleman's game, and the tour started it by bad-mouthing two of their Hall of Famers that decided to bolt from the league. Once they did that, once they said they colored Phil purple and they colored Greg purple, when they rode both of those guys like to the top of the fun ride, right? Okay? They brought it all the way up, man. Phil was winning 45, 46 times. Greg was number one player for 330 weeks. Man, they were riding that train all the way. But when they basically said, I think we're going another way, then they became this. They became persona non grata. They became enemies of the state. And that's exactly why I have this animosity towards the PGA Tour, somewhat, even though I'm still a member. I value what Greg is doing, and I think it's expanding golf. And that's what I've always wanted as a player. I mean, I played worldwide golf. I played in Australia and I played in Europe. And once I got my card in America, I hardly ever went back over anymore because they made it so difficult for me to do it. I mean, it was literally impossible. So that's where I sit.
Another banger of an episode with Mark No Lie Live, folks. Thank you so much for your time. Folks, what do you think of the interview questions that the LIV players and people like Lexi Thompson had to face in the past? Get in the comment section below.
Thanks for having me on. I'll catch you next time, okay?